Hello, my name is J. Joseph Aguilera, and today I will be summarizing and analyzing the entire Tamburlaine saga, parts 1 and 2, written by Christopher Marlowe. The play opens up with the Persian king Mycetes, who is a bit of a dumbass, complaining to his brother Khosrow about the titular Tamburlaine and the disruption he is causing. At this time, Tamburlaine is just a nomadic bandit, and although we don't see him on stage yet, this serves as his introduction. When Tamburlaine first appears on stage, he's trying to put the Mac on some Egyptian princess named Xenocrate. And for the most part, well, he's got game. It's actually working. All of a sudden, though, Theridamas, the warrior Mycetes sent to kill Tamburlaine, shows up with his army ready to fight. But instead of fighting, good old Tamburlaine, who obviously did all the side quests first to max out his speech and charisma stats, begins using the same poetic flair and beautiful language that he used to spit game at Xenocrate, but instead on Theridamas. Tamburlaine wins over Theridamas and his army, convincing him to switch sides and join Tamburlaine's forces. Khosrow also joins up with Tamburlaine in an attempt to consolidate power away from his brother. Upon hearing that Tamburlaine's army is on its way to open up a can of proverbial whoop-ass, Mycetes makes a 400 IQ play, deciding to throw gold on the floor of the battlefield to distract Tamburlaine's forces like they are common house cats. But, predictably, this fails. Tamburlaine barges in just to tell Mycetes that he doesn't want the crown now, but instead when he's done whooping ass. Khosrow steals the crown away, only to be challenged in combat by Tamburlaine for doing this. His possession of the crown, as well as his own life, is short-lived. Tamburlaine kills him in battle and takes the crown for himself. We are then introduced to Bajazeth, a Turkish emperor who, at the time we meet him, is talking with his kingly homies about the disruption that this Tamburlaine is causing. Meanwhile, Aguilera starts talking shit about Tamburlaine straight to Xenocrate's face, saying that she should stay away from him, only for Tamburlaine to appear like Batman in a classic "he's right behind me, isn't he?" moment. And upon realizing his grave mistake, Aguilera decides to kill himself, rather than face the wrath of Tamburlaine. Well played. Soon after this, the battle between Bajazeth and Tamburlaine begins, and as both of their armies are warring, Zambia and Xenocrate argue about whose husband will be whooping whose ass. Predictably, Tamburlaine is the one that does the whooping, and after his victorious battle, takes the newly defeated couple as slaves. He locks Bajazeth up in a cage and uses him as a footrest, which is certainly creative. As his conquering continues, Xenocrate begs Tamburlaine to show mercy on her Egyptian sultan father, despite her father's vows to stop Tamburlaine as he gears up to raid Damascus. The governor of Damascus sends a considerable amount of virgins to Tamburlaine as a peace offering. The virgins, Tamburlaine promptly murders and displays on the walls around the city. Tamburlaine is again, predictably, victorious in his war escapades, sparing and even promoting Xenocrate's father, giving him more land than before. Bajazeth, on the other hand, still sulking in his cage, hears this news of a recent victory and decides that he has had enough. Bajazeth decides to, quote, brain himself on the bars of his cage. Zambia, in a somewhat romantic gesture, does the exact same upon seeing the gruesome fate her husband chose. Nobody seems to care all that much about the double suicide, and part 1 ends with Xenocrate being crowned the Queen of Persia. Years have passed since part 1 of Tamburlaine, but it opens up very similarly with a group of men discussing Tamburlaine, the trouble he is causing, and how they can stop him. The kings of Natalia and Hungary, Orcanes and Sigismund, fear Tamburlaine so much they draw a truce with one another to avoid his wrath. We learn very quickly that the villain from the first anime, Bajazeth, has a kid who has recently escaped Tamburlaine's jail by greasing some palms, and his name is Callapine. Tamburlaine as well has some kids of his own, 3 sons to be exact, and Tamburlaine trains with them, but we learn that one of them, Caliphas, is a bit of a bitch by Tamburlainian standards. Tamburlaine meets up with his homies like Theridamas as they march towards Natalia. Orcanes sends troops to combat Tamburlaine as Sigismund switches lanes on him, breaking their truce and attacking Natalia. Orcanes defeats Sigismund and credits his victory and Sigismund's loss to the will of God. Sigismund is left to the birds, and Orcanes joins his kings in battle with Tamburlaine's forces. Meanwhile, Xenocrates has fallen ill and Tamburlaine returns to comfort her on her deathbed. Tamburlaine does not take her death well because, of course he doesn't. Tamburlaine rages and challenges the heavens and burns down the city she died in, forbidding anyone to build thereafter. Tamburlaine's forces take many cities, and in their victories, Theridamas and Achilles, in the hopes of giving her to Tamburlaine, take captive a dead captain's wife named Olympia, who is dead set on killing herself when they meet. Theridamas quickly falls in love with her, but she pulls a 400 IQ play and tricks him into killing her to avoid becoming another slave wife. Callapine is made the emperor of Turkey, and while he's discussing tactics with other kings, Tamburlaine and his homies pull up and get into an ultimate 14th century shit-talking roast battle. Tamburlaine tops them all by vowing to tie the kings to a horse-drawn carriage, making it a king-drawn carriage. Two of Tamburlaine's sons ready for battle and try to convince Caliphas, the third less manly son, to do the same. Alas, he does not, sitting out the battle, and after Tamburlaine emerges victorious, he finds his third unwarring son and kills him for his incompetence. Some of Tamburlaine's captives even criticize his actions here, but he quickly quiets them by making good on his promise of a king-drawn carriage. Among the captured is the king of Natalia Orcanes, and he begs God to punish Tamburlaine for his actions, but Tamburlaine responds with warming up a slot, pulling his carriage for Orcanes. Tamburlaine also, in one of his most cruel moments, has his soldiers rape the captured king's concubines. Tamburlaine's forces then move on to the city of Babylon to capture. Tamburlaine's forces offer a peaceful surrender to the governor, but he decides to refuse their mercy, and, for his exacerbation of the situation, is shot and hanged once the city is taken. Seeing all these God-fearing kings now captured and fearing Tamburlaine, he orders all the holy books at the temple of Mahomet burned and the inhabitants slaughtered of Babylon, because God certainly dropped the ball in saving them from the scourge of Tamburlaine. After the book burning, Tamburlaine suddenly doesn't feel so good. He decides to rest, but is called forth to action upon the news that Callapine has regrouped and is advancing to kill him. The moment Callapine has been waiting for is now here. It is time for him to avenge his father. Tamburlaine runs out to meet them in battle despite his sickness. Callapine and his men collectively shit a proverbial brick when they see Tamburlaine's face alone and promptly book it in the other direction instead of fighting. Tamburlaine takes his final rest, and in a life chock full of conquering and murder, his only regret is not being able to conquer and murder more people. He draws out a map for his sons to continue conquering and crowns Eramas king. The saga comes to a close as Tamburlaine dies of his sickness and Eramas gives a short speech over the fallen conqueror's dead body, his father. The first aspect of the Tamburlaine saga that I would like to discuss is the author of it himself. Christopher Marlowe is certainly an experienced playwright, but, spoiler alert, he is a white man writing a story about a Muslim conqueror. Marlowe's loose or possibly non-existent relationship with Islam becomes apparent throughout the play. Tamburlaine has a distinct lack of true Muslim characteristics and does not truly hold any Muslim ideology. The most notable example of this is Tamburlaine's constant referencing to Mahomet as a god or as God himself. This is simply wrong. Allah is not the Muslim God, but is simply the Arabic word for God. Mahomet is also not God, but instead an old translation of Muhammad, the Muslim prophet, who, in his life on earth, made it very, very, very clear that he is indeed not a god. The next aspect of this play that I would like to analyze is exactly how it's meant to be read. What exactly is the overall meaning or moral of this story? Although the ending itself is not ambiguous, the meaning of the play certainly is. There are a few different ways to read Tamburlaine. The approach that I'm most attracted to is the one reminiscent of the theoretical problem with God, popularized by David Hume from earlier Greek philosophy. The basis of it is that God cannot be all-powerful and all-good. One must not be true. I believe this play proves that by showing a character as cruel and horrible as Tamburlaine skate through life, committing crimes against humanity and blasphemy, only to die a painless death. Tamburlaine only becomes sick and dies after burning holy books, showing that God is all-powerful by killing Tamburlaine for this blasphemous act, but not all good, given that Tamburlaine was able to conquer and murder as much as he did. Another way to read Tamburlaine is to identify him as what he identifies himself as, what seems like hundreds of times throughout the play: a scourge. In this reading, Tamburlaine is not just a man, but instead a tool implemented by God to punish those who are blasphemous. That is why Tamburlaine is so cruel and always wins and gets away with virtually everything. This is because God put him there as a tool to punish these men for their transgressions. It is only after everyone God wanted punished had met the wrath of Tamburlaine that Tamburlaine falls sick and dies. And furthermore, of course, Tamburlaine would not befall a cruel or gruesome death because he would be protected by God as his tool. The last way that I'll be discussing how to read Tamburlaine is, in my opinion, the most closely aligned with Marlowe's religious ideology. Foundational to the other two ways to read Tamburlaine is indeed a belief in God or a higher power. The third way to read Tamburlaine is a rejection of God, an atheist reading. The play shows this man Tamburlaine just keep winning and conquering and murdering and raping and enslaving all across the land, even Christians. And nobody ever stopped him simply because there was nobody to stop him. God, at least the Christian and Muslim ones, are a myth. If they were real, they would have protected the countless religious people from the scourge of Tamburlaine, or indeed at the very least would have answered his calls for a battle. If any God were truly real, they would have punished Tamburlaine for everything that he did. Any God, if they existed, would have answered the calls for Tamburlaine to be punished. Given that Marlowe himself was an atheist, this is quite a logical approach to reading Tamburlaine, but certainly all three approaches have their benefits.